Everybody. Live streaming from what otherwise is known in my house as Misty's spot. You can see with all this knitted stuff. Anyways, here in the living room, and I'm just thinking about a conversation I've had in the past 24 hours with a colleague that I wanted to share with you all. Um, we were speaking about different treatment modalities, different places where you can work in our fields, and counseling people. And uh, she said something about certain settings where you would be primarily doing the same work over and over again, such as detoxes and uh, hospital settings in the ED and in drunk tanks working for the police, where very often you have to go by a script and you have to collect a lot of demographics information, and you might not see the same person again, or you might see them doing the same thing with them over and over again, but you're not really getting into a deep discussion their life, and you don't really know much about them other than the fact that they're there, and you have asked them a few different questions about little slivers of their life, but you really don't have a really good picture of what their life is because you haven't worked with them for very long in that setting because of the nature of the setting. And there are a lot of jobs in the field that we're in, generally in counseling that are like that, where you would not really delve into uh, a deep therapy session or see somebody for a regular, once a week uh, type deal where you're going to learn a lot more about the same person. And it's frustrating that there are not a lot of jobs offered, without, going out and hanging your own hat out doing therapy yourself. There's not a lot of jobs offered that really delve into people's lives and really help uh, mold them and really help guide them through the deeper issues of life that led to that little hiccup that made them a blip on the radar for, say, the criminal justice system or for hospitals. There's not really as much of an economic incentive for people to try to get the credentials that they would need to do those deeper therapies because it's risky. It's a risky niche to try to get into. And in particular, one of the things that my colleague said, she said that what she was doing in the setting she was in was not therapy. And I looked at her strangely, like she was a Martian, or kind of like that dog in the Sony commercials, like, "Arr," you know. And I know she was wondering why was it that I was looking at her so strangely, and it's because to me, words matter, definitions matter, and what she was doing over and over again, basically an SBIRT, uh, for those of you who might know a little bit more about therapy. It's brief intervention, and it is considered therapy. And so I just felt like stopping the conversation and uh, putting on a class as far as what is or is not therapy, right? And it would have taken way too long for me to impress upon her why I got that look in my eye of like, what the fuck are you talking about? You know? And so I let it go in the moment, but right now I'm venting as far as uh, that little tiny point that really does make a very big difference as far as how clinicians are seeing what they do uh, in their day to day work, right? So, therapy, it's a big umbrella. It encompasses a lot of different things. Um, People have this picture in their minds of, say, a chaise lounge couch that they have their clients laying on, and then they do deep psychotherapy with them, uh, and maybe you know that sort of thing where someone's on a couch is the stereotypical therapy, right? But for clinicians and counselors, right? But there are other things that also are considered therapy, as it were. Um, Hi, guys in the chat. I see that you guys are saying hi. Uh, so therapy, it's not just one-on-one counseling, right? There's also group counseling where you have uh, specific guided scenarios that everyone in the group goes through with the person, and also there are group therapies that are more reliant on the interaction between uh, the people who are actually receiving the therapy. Sometimes the therapy kind of runs on autopilot, and the group members work it out amongst themselves, the lesson that they are supposed to learn, or uh, the release that they're supposed to achieve during that session. But also in group therapies, you'll have cognitive behavioral therapy, you'll have a little bit of motivational interviewing, and uh, the more someone is prescribed as far as the length of therapy, the less towards the end that the therapist actually has to be didactic and teach lessons, right? So you get to this point in group therapy where you might welcome everyone, and then you start by throwing out this topic, and then you watch people work it out amongst themselves, and each of them are there for therapy, but they're talking, and they actually get what they were supposed to out of that therapy without much interaction uh, coming in from the clinician. But to get to that point, you have to start at the beginning, right? And in the beginning, the first few sessions, there's a lot more didactic stuff that comes down from the therapist where they're talking more, where they're doing more of the work. It's more of a presentation, right? Uh, and that sets the foundation for future therapy if you have the same cohort moving through therapy together, right? Prior to that, you might have skills building classes, and these can be as simple as how to balance your checkbook, or places you can go for help, how to ask for help, what kind of hobbies you can become a part of that are healthy versus unhealthy, right? And those skills building classes, those are still therapy, right? You might be teaching the entire time and not really getting much feedback from the clients that you are seeing. But a skills building class is under the umbrella of therapy. Okay, it's one of the most misunderstood aspects of therapy as far as what is therapy and what isn't. But before you get to the skills building class, there is the brief intervention or screening, right? In that, say, first time that you are the first person who a client sees in the healthcare setting, in in that they might have just had a DUI or just been brought to the healthcare facility by police, or uh, whatever the situation is. When you're doing that screening, when you're doing that screening, you are using some techniques that were probably written in the spirit of motivational interviewing and cognitive behavioral therapy, that are written into the questions that you are asking when you're collecting all this demographics information about a person. And uh, this therapy that the client is getting, mostly by you just asking questions about them, can be subtle, right? It can be so subtle that even the clinician doesn't realize what they're doing in that setting. But let's say I had to ask three questions in succession very rapidly. Um, those questions being, what have your hobbies been in your life? And then I ask, what have you been doing with your life in the last 2 weeks in your free time? And then I ask, uh, what's brought you the most satisfaction in your life and made you feel proud of yourself? Right? From those three questions, I can then use cognitive behavioral therapy style uh, questions that are a jumping off point from that. Because some clients will say things that are polar opposites. Like, uh, in the past, their hobbies have been hanging out with family, having a good time, playing sports, uh, doing outdoor hiking with hiking groups and whatnot. You ask them what they've been doing with their life in the last 2 weeks with their free time. They might say drinking, drinking away the pain, hiding out in my house, watching Netflix, you know, and that difference between the two is very important. Then you ask them what made them most proud of themselves, and which of those two answers before is that most like, you know. This is the thing that was most fulfilling to you, and then you haven't been doing it in the last 2 weeks in your free time, and instead you've been doing this thing rather than these other things that you actually identify as your hobbies that make up who you are. You're that hiker, you're that painter, you're that uh, I don't know, RC helicopter flyer, and those things gave you joy, and then what you're doing the last 2 weeks, is different. And bringing to someone's mind the fact that in the last 2 weeks, they have not been doing that thing that brings them joy is therapy, right? And it was as simple as three questions that sets that up. But you are impressing upon that person that there is a problem, you know, you're pointing out. Now there is a chance that those three questions on that questionnaire do not land with that client. There's a chance that there is no dichotomy to be drawn there. There's no this or that, right? But in many circumstances, you will see people that they get a lot out of it, and it's a very very short term thing. They don't need more than that because they're already in a very scary situation that's letting them know the gravity of the bad choices that they're making, right? And what you're doing is directing that fear and anxiety that they have in that situation, and you're showing them this is what might be the culprit, right? And for many people, they only need to learn their lesson once, right? So that brief intervention that you're doing is effective for those people. And in that vein, brief intervention is targeted towards risky and problematic behavior, right? So those people who have severe issues, who it's not just like a little risky thing that they did once, it's not something that they might be likely to do in a party situation, it's something that they do all the time. Those people aren't reached as much by brief interventions. And so when a clinician thinks that what they're doing isn't therapy, when they keep doing the same brief interventions with the same clients that have severe issues, then what they're missing is how important those brief interventions are to people who are being helped by the brief intervention, because it's actually targeted more towards just risky behavior instead of severe issues, right? So I can see where clinicians might think that they're being particularly ineffective in certain settings. But words matter, definitions are important, and the intent of things is important when you're thinking about what actually is or isn't therapy. So when I hear someone complaining that what they're doing uh, isn't the therapy that they thought they'd be doing, be it they thought that they'd be more like Freud talking to someone on a chaise lounge, maybe with an Afghan or a crocheted thing right next to them, you know, relaxing and just working out problems, or maybe they felt like they were going to be like uh, Benson from Law and Order SVU, saving children from uh, horrible family situations, and that's not what they're doing because they're not a super CPS worker slash detective, because they watch too much TV. Whatever it is that the clinician is not happy with about their job, they might have this picture of what their job would have been, this idealized thing, and then they see what they're doing now, and they don't value what they're actually achieving, because they see the repetition and the grind of it, and uh, that leads to people not considering brief interventions and even skills building classes as being part of therapy. But under the umbrella of what is or is not therapy, brief intervention is therapy, and it is important both as a screening tool and as a treatment for risky and problematic behavior. And that's all I really have to say on the subject. And I can see that I'm almost 18 minutes in, right? And in that conversation that I was in, to just like unload on someone, this perspective might have been uh, out of place. Yeah, yeah, it would have been out of place. But at least I have you guys to vent to, and maybe somebody later on will see this video. Maybe they're thinking about being a clinician, or they're needing to rebut some of their coworkers who are unhappy with their lives, and they need to hear this sort of a speech. And for those of you who come across this video uh, with that sort of mindset, you're welcome. And for the others who are just getting a little glimpse into my life, um, yeah, you're welcome too. Damn it. Leave a like, comment below, and let's see. In the chat, the dad joke guy says, "I think people often confuse therapy and something that could be therapeutic but is benign without direction." Uh, yeah, um, and I think a lot of that confusion is uh, if there is intent in what you're doing and it is being not applied to the right demographic, it's not being applied to the right clientele. That's where it looks more benign. When you're constantly dealing with people with serious issues and you are uh, only giving them the first bit of the progression of what therapy is supposed to be, that looks benign in their life. The Stable Genius says everyone knows therapists molest kids. at an even higher rate than Catholic priests. It just hasn't been confirmed yet. Um, I I don't see that. Um, and at least therapists would lose their license if they're caught, and they wouldn't be shuffled around to different clinical settings very easily. And also, there's some overlap there because a lot of Catholic priests actually do have degrees and licenses as clinicians. And you might have been joking, but I take everything seriously. And uh, let's see. Stormy FX says, "What is good, my dude? Self care and sleep and proper nutrition in my life right now is good. I'm thinking about what I'm going to eat for dinner." Um, Neuronal Axon says, "Well, you can't fix broken people there and then, can you? That much is obvious. Actually, you can do a lot of good. And broken people. Um, everyone's got issues, dude. Uh, there are some people who just need to see that one thing about their life in order to realize that there is a problem, you know. And in a setting where you're doing a lot of brief intervention, there are some people who you will just give a sheet of referrals to who will go right to whatever it is that they needed on that sheet, be it DUI classes or therapy, family therapy, right? And they will go sign up for it, use their insurance, and you will never see them again because they fix whatever it is immediately. And what you did in referring them was a very pivotal moment in their life. And you did, quote unquote, fix them by pointing them in the right direction. Um, man, you guys are commenting really fast here at the end. Uh, do therapists have a choice as to who they can see? For example, when they went to school with or they grew up with, perhaps. They don't have a choice to see either of those. You would remove yourself from the situation and refer someone to a different source of care if you could. Um, that's actually an ethical guideline that you don't want dual relationships with your clients. And where that is the hardest is in rural areas where everybody knows everyone. You know, if you're the only therapist for 100 miles in a small town, it's very likely that you're going to have a lot of different connections with someone. Be it their parent is somebody that you go duck hunting with, or you always stop at the gas station where they are the only attendant at night, and you see them daily. You know, you're going to run into those issues. Maybe you went to the same school that they did, and like a lot of alumni uh, are connecting you with them with only like 2 degrees of separation. You know, maybe it's that close, and you just have to look at like the extreme region that you're in and go, well, it would be more difficult for them to go seek therapy, you know, by driving 2 hours out of their way every day to go to a big city to get therapy and then drive 2 hours back. That's 4 hours of driving just to go to a therapy session. They're not going to do it. So you have to weigh those things and document what were the dual relationships. And a lot of times it's very good to talk to other clinicians and get their help with that sort of a situation. If there's, say, 3 therapists in the area and all of them would have a dual relationship with that same client, the one that does end up taking the client should talk to the others about the issues that might be brought up with that, you know, and get some clinical supervision, some other eyes on issues like that. Uh, let's see. Yeah, the word "you" shouldn't be capitalized, but you know what? Every time you type in another word in the title when you're doing a live stream, it automatically capitalizes it. Uh, yes, it's like recusing lawyers. when you have a conflict of interest that is so big that it cannot be overcome by simply bringing it into the room and saying, "Hey, I realize that you and I have some friends in common. You have to realize that there's confidentiality here, and I'm not going to talk to anyone about your issues. And if you can't clear it all up in 10 minutes of talking, then you probably shouldn't be seeing that client, and you should." "Quote unquote," recuse yourself, but we actually call it referring to another provider. And let's see. Stable Genius Progressive says, "It seems like therapy needs to be more structured or something from what I've seen. I mean, is it really therapy if it's just bullshitting with some stranger?" Absolutely. Therapy should be structured and have goals. Yes. Smart goals, achievable goals, and should be oriented towards, yeah. That's it. If it does break down into just bullshitting, somebody should redirect and get back on course and deal with the issues. You should only be giving someone as much therapy as they actually need, and you should try to deal with the issues in a reasonable amount of time. You wouldn't want to be running up billing on a client just talking about baseball every time you see them when they have an issue that you could be fixing for them, and they could move on and not need your therapy anymore. Baseball. I don't even talk about baseball. Um, so he also says, so there are people who require long term fixing, and I'm presuming a much smaller group who just need pointing in the right direction. No, it's the other way around. The larger group would be the people who only need smaller interventions, and it's progressively a tinier group that needs uh, the interventions that you would have for severe problems, and those people have a disproportionate effect on the economy and resources, and so they're seen more, and their patterns and behaviors are actually more stereotypically known as far as what is a person with that problem, right? So the people that you see more often would probably be people that you can uh, use a briefer period of therapy for, and they would be able to right their lives after that, or they might relapse later. Relapse is part of this, but they'll be good for a while. All right. So he says, in my opinion, what a joke. Okay. There are a lot of people who do not appreciate uh, any form of talk therapy whatsoever. And then there's the opposite, people who only like talk therapy and don't like uh, psychiatry and medicine getting involved. We call those people Scientologists. um, but evidence based therapy is the key here. If you have evidence that the therapies are working, that's the therapy that you should be using. And as clinicians, we learn evidence-based therapy. Um, there is evidence that proves that there are good outcomes if you use this style of therapy. Um, Science, it works. Let's see. Do. And here's Principled Uncertainty saying, I've benefited from therapy. I recommend taking what works for you from whatever you encounter. Never let them touch your balls. Fool me once. Oh no. You had me going there. And then I read the rest of your comment. That's it. Nobody else. I've been talking for 30 minutes. Uh, I'll see you guys later.